Good evening and welcome back to Sports Talk ATL. I am Chase Earl, joined by Alex. Lord, we're just a few weeks away, really, because free agency, I feel like in the NBA and the NFL, you wait a good bit after the regular season. The one thing I think MLB does a really good thing is they have the World Series, and the next day it's MLB free agency. Like it's game time. You have to wait, I think, 5 days before officially signing, but signings will come out quickly. We have seen in the past a lot of the big guys have waited. Hopefully they do some. Hopefully that changes. Maybe they do something. I don't know how it's going to be this year, but a couple of names to keep up for that are not in the free agent market. Marcell Ozuna, the Braves expect to pick up his option for $16 million. That is not a surprise, but whether he is on the roster is another question entirely. Bleacher Report recently did an article about why the Braves should trade Marcell Ozuna. And I think they made a lot of good points, one. And two, I think they left out some of the most important points, and we're going to get into those. The main points, though, are the guy's 32 years old. He's coming off his 2 best seasons. You sell high on an asset. The other big point is you have a DH and Jorge Soler already on the roster that's younger. You can't have both them on the roster. We've talked about that already. One of them has to get dealt. So trading Marcell Ozuna over Jorge Soler may be easier to do, may give you a bigger return, and you inevitably trade one of those DHs.
I wonder, I just thought of this, and it's kind of a sidebar. What did Alex Anthopoulos think at the trade deadline? This is not a checkers kind of a GM. This is a chess kind of GM where he doesn't acquire Jorge Soler at the trade deadline. He obviously knows the contract he's acquiring. The contracts are already in-house. Ronald Acuna Jr.'s ACL injury, there's a lot of questions about that and that timeline. So he acquired Jorge Soler from the Giants for virtually nothing. It was pretty much just a salary dump for the Giants. But what was his, future plan where it's like, because he's not the type of guy to just go, oh, we'll figure it out tomorrow. He had something in the back of his mind. I'll be able to move Ozuna. I'll be able to move Jorge Soler. Or maybe, he's a wild man and actually thinks one of these guys can play not the worst defense in right field. I wonder what it is because, in our heads, it's obvious. One of them has to be traded, right? There's no way we can go in with one of them playing right field.
I think at the trade deadline, he thought Jorge Soler could play left or right field and be just fine, and his offense would make up for it. And we found out that, yes, it kind of did because we were so desperate for offense. But in the grand scheme of things, he was so bad defensively.
Chris Sale's ERA was directly impacted by Jorge Soler.
Watching Jorge Soler plays defense kind of contradicts my whole I don't care about defense thing. Yeah. Like I always am sitting up here no, I want guys that can hit bombs, screw defense, who cares? That makes you take a step back and be like, okay, maybe not that much. Yeah. Maybe not that bad defense because he really does look like, a deer in the headlights, a giraffe out there just galloping in the outfield.
Fish out of water. That guy has no idea what he's doing with the glove in his hand.
Not. Frankly, I'm not quite sure Marcell Ozuna would even be worse in the outfield, and that's saying something. That's how bad Jorge Soler. So there's no way they can do that experiment. He was the worst defensive player over that 46 game sample size that he played in right field for the Braves by far of anyone. And he had -7 outs above average. The worst in Major League Baseball, which came at shortstop, I believe, was C.J. Abrams, was -18. That guy played a full season at shortstop, a much more difficult position than right field. To do that in right field in 46 games, average 28 over a full 162, outs above average, -28, that being, is insanity. That can't happen, right? And we know Marcell Ozuna. So one of these guys has to be traded. The question is, which one? And I asked the question even, why not both? And why I say why not both is because we don't know what Ronald Acuna is going to be, right? And we're not going to know, frankly, until probably really close to the season what he's comfortable being. But there is a world where he's DHing more often than not and maybe being a full-time DH. And in that case scenario, you're like, well, what are we going to do with Ozuna and Soler? You only really have one option, and they're both movable contracts. You probably won't have to eat any money. You won't get a ton in return for either of them because DHs aren't desired like a lot of other positions, but they're both very good offensive players that serve their respective roles and aren't on crazy contracts. And the Braves can save $32 million and spend that on an outfielder that could actually play defense. So I don't think it's a crazy scenario where not just Jorge Soler or Marcell Ozuna. If Ronald Acuna isn't comfortable and they're not comfortable putting him in the outfield, they're both gone. And I don't see any scenario where either of them is on the roster if they think Acuna is going to have to DH more often than not.
Yeah, and even on top of that, you've got two catchers who are more than comfortable to go in there and, give a DH a couple games here, a couple games there for Ronald Acuna Jr. in the scenario where they trade both Jorge Soler and Marcell Ozuna and Travis d'Arnaud and Sean Murphy. Both of them. I mean, the grueling, nature of being a catcher isn't the 3 at-bats a game. It's sitting behind the dish and just getting pegged with 95-mile-an-hour fastballs every single day. So I think, that's another option where I do think that if you're just looking at it, take away the names, take away the numbers, you're not, Ronald Acuna Jr. is going to be in this organization for the foreseeable future. How can we get as good as humanly possible? There's certainly an argument to be made where you can, because outfielders are a dime a dozen. Same with DHs. You could go spend a lot of money, that money that you were going to allocate towards Jorge Soler and Marcell Ozuna, and get a damn good outfielder who can play every single day and potentially be even better than them.
$32 million a year gets you damn near gets you Juan Soto. I mean, it gets you every other outfielder not named Juan Soto. And there's a lot of guys. There's Cody Bellingers out there. There's Teoscar Hernandez. So there's Anthony Santander.
That combination of that, whoever that is, and Ronald Acuna at DH seems a lot. It like that scenario seems like it could produce more WAR. Let's just WAR to dollars than say keeping one of those guys and, going out and getting a bum, a stopgap right fielder, so to speak.
Yeah. And obviously the hope is that, Ronald Acuna is healthy, can play right field. You keep Marcell Ozuna or Jorge Soler. Now let's make the case that Ronald Acuna Jr. is healthy and you'd rather move Marcell Ozuna. I think really your only basis for that is if Jorge Soler doesn't have a lot of interest. You're going to have to eat a good chunk of the money. You're not going to get any return. Someone really wants Marcell Ozuna. I don't necessarily know if that scenario exists, but it could potentially exist. And then you're looking at Marcell Ozuna and you're like, how likely is he to replicate a 40 homer, 100 RBI season? He's done it 2 times in a row, but he's never done that before in his career. These are the 2 best offensive seasons in his career. And listen, once you get to age 34, and it doesn't always happen the same way with DHs, you usually start to hit some regression. The power dips a little bit, and it can happen very, very quickly. One more year of Marcell Ozuna, I don't really see the Braves being too worried about that, but it is potentially an option. I'm still here saying if Ronald Acuna is healthy, it's going to be Jorge Soler gone. But I do see a scenario where if there's no trade value for Soler, they have to eat that money and they can move Ozuna. Maybe they do stick with Jorge Soler.
I still would argue that they would eat some of that money, and I don't think it would be. I do think that if they do trade Soler, they will have to eat some of it. Not all of it, but some of it, I think. And it'll be one of those cat and mouse games where, like, the more you eat, the better you get. Less you eat, the worse you get in terms of trade compensation. I also think, we say it time and time again, and it, sometimes feels like it falls on deaf ears, but like locker room chemistry is still a big thing to Alex Anthopoulos. No matter, the early playoff exits and everything. You can't overshadow the success they've had. And I could make an argument that what they did this past season exemplifies the locker room chemistry aspect even more, where everything was going their way, but they still stuck together and somehow made the playoffs. That's just not going to go out the window. And Ozuna is a glue guy in that locker room. I know it feels like it's one of those things where it's like lower on the totem pole, but in this organization, it's really not.
Yeah, I agree with you and I disagree with you. Like, I understand, like, the one thing that I keep having to get over that hurdle, like, oh, yeah, but why would they trade away this guy that's so loved, having this, back-to-back? He's on a very manageable contract. It's only for 1 more season. Like, there's not really a ton of reasons unless Ronald Acuna is injured. But then again, we saw them let Dansby Swanson walk. We saw them let Freddie Freeman walk. And you can't tell me those guys didn't have just as much, if not more, of a locker room clubhouse presence than those 2 guys. So I definitely think it's something that's on the table. I wouldn't say it's likely, but it is something that will be considered.